Welcome to another episode of the Understanding Ultra podcast, the podcast that likes to ask the question, why? We aim to give you the insights from the top ultra runners and trail runners from around the world, the people that work in the trail industry, and everybody else. We dive into training, nutrition, mindset, and racing strategies to help you to become the best ultra runner that you can be. So without further ado, let's speak to our next guest. Okay, so welcome to Understanding Ultra, Rickey Gates.
Thanks for having me here. Appreciate it.
That's no problem. Thanks for coming on. So over there, it's morning. It's 10 a.m.
Yeah, 10 a.m. I got my cup of coffee. I just dropped my daughter off at daycare. And after this podcast interview, I'm going to go into our bathroom and start chiseling away at the concrete below the shower. So I got a little demolition project coming up after this.
Yeah, that's something to look forward to.
Yeah.
Excellent. Right. Well, for people that aren't aware of who you are, these are some facts, and you can tell me whether they're true or not. So you're an ultra runner for Salomon. You've ran for Salomon since 2008. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah.
2008. You're famous for a few things, but the couple of things that you're really known for is running across America, your Transamericana film, and also you are to thank for the craze of running every street of every city, because you started that with San Francisco. You're a traveler, which I didn't even, when I started to do my research on you, I didn't realize the extent of your prowess as a traveler. You've been literally to every single continent of the world, haven't you? And we just pre-recording, we had a conversation about your background, which, so for people watching on YouTube, that's great, but for ones that are listening to the audio version, they won't be able to see the racks and racks and racks of jars of dirt that are behind you. And you told me before we started recording that that's from every place that you've been. Is that every place you've visited or every place you've ran in the world?
No, every place I've visited, that holds a certain interest to me, kind of over the past 20 years. My first travels away from home was when I was 19. I visited South America for 5 months and came back with a whole bunch of souvenirs and knickknacks and trinkets and stuff, and it filled my backpack. I got rid of most of those knickknacks after a few months or a couple of years, and just kind of like didn't have a deep connection to them. And so my next time traveling after that, I kind of came up with this idea to just kind of pick a little bit of dirt off the ground and take that home and put it in a jar and label it. And I think there's something like 240 jars up there. And every single one of them I pick up, and I can kind of take myself back to that place and who I was with and kind of my state of mind. And some of them have a smell to them, which is kind of cool and interesting to me. And so yeah, it's just kind of a way for me to frame 2 decades plus of traveling around the world.
Wow. Did you have any trouble bringing any of the jars across customs?
They've never been taken away from me, but at the same time, I've never claimed them either. So yeah. Homeland Security hasn't come knocking on my door yet.
Okay, good. So just following on from talking a bit about you. So obviously you're an extensive traveler. We've discussed that. You're a writer, you're a photographer, and you're a prolific filmmaker. And you've been you've been described as the poet laureate of ultra running. So all of those descriptions about you and things you've done, my first question to you is, how would you describe Rickey Gates?
Oh, gosh, I don't know. I like all of those descriptions very much. I appreciate them. Right now I'm 41 years old, and I've got an 8-month-old daughter and a wife and a house, and I live in the suburbs of Santa Fe, New Mexico. So yeah, I guess over the past 2 or 3 years, my life has changed quite a bit, and I'm quite happy with where I am right now. So, dad, husband, son, brother, runner, mover, artist. So that's that would be it in short.
So you waited quite a while to become a dad then?
Yeah, 40 years, I guess. Yeah, she was born. So yeah, 41. And I was, and I haven't had, any immense life plans. Like it's not exactly how I planned it, but I do know that for me personally, having the freedom of my 20s and 30s to for lack of a better description, be more selfish and kind of do things for myself has allowed me to kind of be much more focused with where I am and what I'm doing today. And it's just been wonderful. Willa's at daycare right now, but I usually have her while my wife is at work 3 to 4 days a week. And then of course the weekends, and just being able to watch this person grow and explore new things and discover, and it's just been really wonderful. And I don't know if I would have had that attention or focus or curiosity 10 or 15 or 20 years ago. So yeah, I'm happy with
I would argue against that, because I think that having kids kind of stops you in your tracks a little bit. So I was 30 years old, and I woke up wasn't necessarily on my 30th birthday, but in my 30th year, I thought, I feel like an adult now. Now I've turned 30. Now I actually feel like I can probably look after myself a little bit. So maybe I could look after a kid. So I told my wife this, and she obviously panicked because she is a lot younger than me. She was eight years younger than me. So she was only 22, and she knew that we were always were going to have kids, but she didn't quite expect it to be so soon after we got married. But I think from my experience of having kids, it kind of it focuses you. No, I suppose the main takeaway for me was that it made me realize how much time I had before having kids, not how much time, possibly how much time I wasted a little bit, not really appreciating how much time I had before this wonderful bundle of joy came into my life, and I focused on it. So I can actually see 100% see your logic in waiting until you've got out of the way all of your selfish endeavors through the years, and you've had many endeavors, haven't you?
Yeah, and I would also say there's a big argument for having kids on the earlier side. As a friend said recently, there's it's no mistake that we can actually have children in our mid-teens, because that's the amount of energy that you need in order to raise something for the next 15, 20 years. And without question, I do look forward of being 55 and trying to keep up with my teenage daughter, but I'm up for the challenge.
Well, mine are. I'll get this. I'll be in trouble for getting this wrong. 12 and 10. So they're getting towards the teenage years now, and but they're starting to give us a bit more freedom as they're getting older and wanting to do their own things. It's nice that we can focus on things, the slightly selfish things that we want to do. So I'm all for being a parent. I think I was speaking to Dylan Bowman a few weeks ago, interviewed him, and he's expected, I don't know, within these last 2 weeks, he was supposed to be becoming a father, and we had a very candid conversation about having kids and how he was, worried about the future. So, do you worry about the future for your child, Willow?
I mean, I do and I don't. I think that each of us are born into a different time, and we don't really have the context to understand what life was like before. Like obviously we've got a warming planet, we've got a lot of division happening But I think in terms of what my responsibility is to simply, try and give my daughter the best tools that she can have in order to move forward in that. And I also think that it's like, yeah, it can be just kind of how we look at things, how we talk about things, that can paint a more negative picture of what the future is and where we're going. I think if you really look at it, so many of us are better off than we've ever been in human history. We have access to amazing technology, medicine, education, all of these things, and so it's so much of it is just a matter of perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, can understand. Then that point, thinking about the future, it just made me think about obviously the film, the project that you had, the Transamericana. Now that was I watched the film and it's mind blowing, really. What was your motivation for wanting to take on that project?
The main motivation was, I mean, there was a few things going on there. It's something that I had always wanted to do, so it's not something that I just came up with all of a sudden and decided to go across the country. I'd wanted to do something like that since I was 19 years old. I actually started biking across the country when I was 19 on my road bike with racing gears and race tires and probably 50 or 60 pounds of gear towed behind me. And of course, I blew up within 3 days. I thought I had done permanent damage to my knee, and I threw in the towel. And so it was something that was just kind of sitting there like an unfinished project for quite a while. And then, fast forward to when I actually took on the project, it was a couple things. I felt like, again, the opportunity to do something like that was kind of that window, that door was closing. The time in my life when I was actually able to take on something like that was coming to an end, at least in the manner that I wanted to do it in. Kind of leaving my family behind and doing it solo and stuff like that. And then, like, lastly, so I had intended on doing my crossing regardless of how the 2016 elections went. But it was, I mean, we could all feel, and obviously we're still feeling this today, just a great divide, not just in this country, but kind of around the world. And I wanted to look at that firsthand and kind of see really what that was all about. And what I ended up seeing is that, like, yes, there's a divide, but it's actually quite superficial. And it's one that's amplified by both politics and media. And when you really get down to it and you put yourself out there and make yourself vulnerable, so many of us are way more similar than we are different. And so that was that was kind of the core of the project. There was exploring those differences and seeing what I could see.
I noticed one of the quotes was that you realized that with 90%, all people are 90% the same and only 10% different. So what led you to come to that conclusion about people? Was it how people treated you in certain areas of the country?
Yeah, it's how people treated me, and or when you're running across the country, like I do know that people have done similar projects, and actually there was a couple from Belgium biking across the country the same time that I was, and they were asking pretty much every single person like who they voted for and why. And I heard about that and I'm like, man, that sounds like I mean, no offense to them. I appreciate their their endeavor, but it just sounded like a miserable way to go across the country, is like to immediately dive into politics with every single person. And what I was finding is that, like, when someone saw me running, into a cafe or at a gas station or along the side of the road, they would pull over and ask what I was doing, and see if I needed food or water, and I would get to ask them about their life and like kind of how they grew up and what they do for work or what they do for fun, and what their families are like, and to me that was way more interesting. And I think the core of our differences right now are, like, we all want protection for our family, we want protection for ourselves, we want to protect what's ours. And there's a lot of very different ways to go about doing that, and that's where you get the divide. So I see that the core of our beliefs are pretty much the same. It's just how we go about executing them that makes it so different.
Yeah, we're all human, aren't we? We're all
Yeah.
and we all have the same imperfections, all have the same worries in life, and we all want the best for our families. Yeah, because I can see. I suppose actually, if you're cycling, you've probably got a bit more energy to have conversations like that. But when you're running, you tend to be kind of focused on the job in hand, don't you? When you're running, and then your actual basic needs of life at that point were to keep moving and to find sustenance. So, and those people obviously recognize that the last thing you probably wanted to talk about, or what they wanted to talk about, was politics. And the thing that was most pressing at that point in time was who you were, why you were running in their neighborhood, and could they help you. So it kind of brings out the basic needs of humans, will bring out the basic kindness in people, I suppose you could say. Yeah,
vulnerability, there's a lot to be said for it. It's just I mean, I didn't carry a weapon with me or anything. It's I was asked multiple times, like, I hope you're carrying a gun or something, and I'm like, I don't need a gun. Why do you need a gun?
You can run fast, you can run away.
Yeah.
And one of the things I loved about the video was the section which I didn't expect at all was a section of you paddleboarding on the were we on the Mississippi or on the Missouri?
The Arkansas River, which is also a humongous river. And I paddled across the state of Alabama, about 300 miles.
Wow. So did you realize what you were up against with that? Because I noticed that you said in the film that you say at one point that you're not sure why you decided to do that, because you're scared of water.
Yeah, I knew that I wanted to have that experience before I started the trip. And when I had planned on getting to Chattanooga, Tennessee, and I was looking on Craigslist and to see if I could find a used canoe or a kayak. I've kayaked before. I've done a little bit of canoeing, and just figured I'd find something there that I could buy and for cheap, and then sell it or just leave it by the river as I got to the other side of Alabama. And when I got to Chattanooga, a friend of a friend there, he's like, "Have you ever considered stand-up paddleboarding?" And I'm like, "No, I've never been on a stand-up paddleboard." And he convinced me that was the way to go. And it actually ended up being great, because you can kneel down, you can stand up. Some of these stand-up paddleboards that they make, like the one that my friend lent me, can hold 300, 400 pounds. They're really amazing. And for mellow water like that, it was just perfect. Nothing was really getting wet unless I was getting rained on. But the reason that I wanted to have that experience is just kind of like thinking about how America specifically was expanded by Europeans, kind of post 1492. We started off on the East Coast and moved to the West Coast, and so that's kind of the direction that I wanted for the entire trip in general. And in the several hundred years that it was expanded, whenever the opportunity came along to use water as a means of transportation, like you definitely took it. Like Lewis and Clark spent, I don't know, 1,000 or 1,500 miles on the water. And they weren't like dedicated to going across the country on land for the sake of being on terra firma. They were dedicated to getting to the other side of the continent. And so I just wanted that experience. And when I was looking at a map of the United States beforehand, I was just kind of looking for rivers that were moving generally in that direction, east to west, and without too much rapids or white water. And the Tennessee River is dammed for hundreds of miles, and so it's actually like pretty still water for the entire way that I went across. I actually thought I was going to be able to just kind of relax and float down the river a bit more than I did. And it turned out I had to paddle pretty much every one of those miles.
Yeah, I know previous listeners to the podcast, they will realize that I do a lot of paddleboarding, and I discovered paddleboarding as a cross-training exercise for when I was injured last year, and I decided that right, this is the thing I'm going to do. I'm going to get a paddleboard. It's great for your core, it's great for your upper body coordination and everything, and great for your balance and your keeping your feet strong and everything, having to balance on a board. And it's one of those things that kind of took me by surprise. I didn't realize I would love it. I don't love it as much as I love running, but it's if I couldn't run again tomorrow, it would be the sport that I would go and do. And I love the bit in the video where you improvise with your tarpaulin and then your hiking pole, and you used it as a makeshift sail. Did that actually work? Did it get you moving?
It worked for, I think it worked for about 2 miles.
Yeah.
It worked long enough for the video clip.
Yeah, it all helps. Yeah, because I know exactly what you mean by people assume that you're going with the current of the river. Obviously, it's easy, and it's not, is it? You still have to you move a bit faster, but there's a local river near us, the River Trent, quite a big wide river that flows right through Nottingham and out to the coast, and that's quite a wide, slow moving river, and it's great because you can paddle against the current and go as far as you like in one direction and then turn around and come back. And it is easier, but you're still having to paddle. So
still anyway, working.
We're not talking about paddleboarding, we're talking about running. So just thinking about, you were talking about how you'd looked at maps and figured this route out. You're known for being a map guy, aren't you? Is that true to say?
Oh yeah, I'm obsessed with maps. Yeah.
And that's something that came to the forefront when you were planning your run every single street. Is that the full title of it? Run every single street?
Yeah, I just call it every single street because I'll be honest, I wasn't running all of it. It's like ultra running. I don't know why we call it ultra running. So much of ultra running is just like walking. Yeah, ultra hiking. So yeah, it can be a bit of a misnomer. But yeah, that one definitely challenged my sense of direction and maps and all of that. I have a stack of maps from when I ran every single street in San Francisco, because you can use your phone for this stuff, and it's gotten even better just in the past few years to be able to track where you've run, and not just on a given day's run, but multiple days worths of runs, and you can kind of compile them and see it on your phone. But for San Francisco, I was printing out an 8x10 piece of paper of the neighborhood that I was running through pretty much every day. So I've got a stack of maps that I used for that run sitting in a drawer in my bedroom. I don't know what I'm going to do with them, but they are kind of fun to go back and look at.
In the archive. So you involved somebody else with the planning of that, did you? With as far as like working out the most efficient route?
Yeah, so I did reach out to a friend. I think it was like 6 months or 9 months before I was back home in Colorado, and I told a friend that I had grown up with that I was planning this project to do all of the streets in San Francisco. And he's like, he said to me, Ricky, you do realize that like that is my specialty, my PhD. He's a brilliant mathematician, and he now is at MIT here in the States teaching mathematics. And so we worked together and tried to figure out a way to take the data that is available from like Google Maps or whatever mapping company or app, and can like create borders in order to do a certain area the most efficiently. And it was trial and error, which I wasn't totally prepared for, certainly in terms of like doing 30 plus miles day after day after day. And when this algorithm fails and you're 25 miles into a 30-mile day, and then you realize like you have to figure out how to do those last like 15 blocks that are all over the place, it just became really challenging. And so I experimented with it a few times and kind of executed the actual algorithm, I think just twice. But ultimately for me at the time, going full analog with a paper map and a pen in my hand was the easier way to go about doing it.
Wow, it just seems like a logistical nightmare to me. I know that like recently I've been looking at routes to try and put together an FKT and trying to hit certain points in an area. And every time I sit down and start it, I feel like overwhelmed by the enormity of having to figure it all out. And then I like do a little bit and think, oh, I'll just leave it and come back to it. So my mind sort of boggles at the thought of doing, because what was it in distance in total then? Distance and then the elevation in the end, what was it? What did it work out to? Was it 1,300 miles, was it?
Yeah, so the actual mileage of streets in San Francisco is around 1,100, and then the inevitable inefficiency of it brought it up to about 1,370 miles with about 150,000 feet of climbing. So yeah,
You're quite about that.
Yeah, there was days there when I was getting 10,000 feet of climbing just on a Potrero Hill, which is only 300 feet tall, and
Wow.
just going up and down it, up and down it, up and down it.
That's amazing. I mean, obviously you do realize that doing that's kind of set off a trend for people to do that all over the world, didn't they? You know, it was the kind of, it was, even over here, I know it was like in newspapers and running magazines and things. Did you realize, did you kind of comprehend at the time that doing that project would have like a global reach?
I was hoping that it would expand. I am amazed at this point that it has expanded as far as it has. One thing that I couldn't possibly have anticipated in 2018 is that, 2 years later, we'd be going into a global pandemic where people were literally not allowed to, some people were not allowed to leave their towns, counties, neighborhoods. And it ended up being the absolute perfect project for someone to take on when all of their races got canceled and all of their travel plans got canceled. So I think that gave it a particularly large boost. And yeah, I think it's wonderful. I organize running trips. And so I do it like it's part of my job to encourage people to, fly to Colorado, or I just returned from a trip in Alaska to go up to Alaska and check out these places with me. But at the same time, I think that running can be an adventure right out the front door. And if you just kind of are creative about it, and you're open to something a little bit different. And I think that most people that have taken on this project have just discovered a completely different realm of running. And more importantly, they've discovered a different part of their towns and cities. And I think that's the biggest takeaway for me with every single street, is that it's really a pathway for empathy for people to understand people that live in their community, and to have this this thing, like, I just got back from Home Depot, our hardware store, and I'm doing the same project here in Santa Fe, New Mexico. And to walk up and down the aisles and look at the other people that are shopping there, and just know with confidence that I've run past every single person's house. And like, no, I don't know exactly how everybody lives, but I have a much better sense of it than I did, before I started this project. So I think that's the most important part of it.
It's amazing, actually. You jogged my memory when you mentioned about people just exploring the local area, because that was one of the things, wasn't it, about the pandemic, that for all the bad things that happened, it made people explore locally, because that's all they had. They weren't allowed. I mean, I was quite privileged that I still worked all the way through the pandemic. My employer stayed open because we were an engineering company that were classed as essential. So my commute, which I've always done on foot or on cycle, was within reasonably allowed for me to do that, because that was my job and I was going to my job. So I still managed to get 2 runs or running a cycle in every day, going backwards and forwards to work. That's only sort of like 7 miles across a couple of villages. So for me, one of the benefits of it was just being in my own area, and trails that I thought that because it's a little rural village where I live, and I thought that I knew all of the trails around the village and through fields. And because obviously in the UK things are quite open, we have open access paths that go through fields, go through farmers' land, go even like directly through the middle of farms at sometimes. So we've got this network that people probably didn't really know was there. And I've lived here for 10 years, and I thought that I ran everywhere in the area, but it turns out I haven't. So just seeing, like, running on a trail that I've ran down every single day, and just seeing a little turn off, a little footpath going to the left or going to the right, I suddenly had this urge to think, well, it looks like someone's already gone down there, because everyone had. So I was like, well, I'll go and check that out. I'm going to have a look. And I discovered trails across fields and through bits of land that I didn't know existed at all. And I think one of the main ironies that I found at the time was that all these trails that I've never been on, or that I've been on before, were all immaculately trodden down, because sometimes some of the trails in the UK, with the rain that we have and then warm weather, they can get overgrown really quickly. But every single trail I went on had been trodden down, and I thought it's such a shame that there's no races on at the minute, because some of these races that we do over here in the summer that go across these bits of land, we're like stomping through nettles and being stung, and we're having like brambles, like briars you would call them, I suppose, like attacking us. And suddenly for 2 summers, all of these trails are all absolutely immaculate, and you can get down them and they're perfect. So it's it was a shame that the races were off, but obviously there was a good reason for that. But I know so many people that got into either walking or hiking during the pandemic and explored their local area. And I think you're right, what you did just fit perfectly into that. And I remember seeing people on Strava having attempts at it, and people all over the world having a go, running every street in every town. So it's it's a bit of a legacy for you now, isn't it? Do you think?
Yeah, no, it's awesome. And I'm trying to figure out how to keep it going, and for me personally, like doing it now that I've only been in Santa Fe for 3 years, but taking it on in this new town, and we don't plan on moving anywhere anytime soon, but like if and when we do, I plan on doing this project every time that I move. And then it also just, it's, as I continue to do it, there's more and more connections that are made for me with, that move more into an artistic realm rather than a running realm, which is fun to kind of think about. And
different point of view. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you mentioned about being away in Alaska. So you organise. So let me get this right: run, bus, run, and run, hut, run. So what are those projects that you put on? Is it twice a year you do these, or more times a year?
So the first trip, the Hut Run Hut, I put that on usually twice a year. And that's one that I put together for the past decade. This is my 9th year doing it. Next year will be 10 years. And that's in my hometown of Aspen, Colorado. I grew up working for these backcountry huts that was started in the 1980s. It was meant to be initially just skiing from hut to hut, but then they realized the potential of the huts during the summertime as well for hikers and bikers. And I grew up maintaining the trails, putting finish on the outside of the huts, chopping firewood. And so that at this point was 25 years ago. And I just knew that I always wanted to keep these huts in my life and to share them with other people. And so that's when I started Hut Run Hut and doing a point-to-point 100-mile 6-day run through the Colorado Rockies, staying at a different hut each night and taking advantage of vehicle assistance. So we can do 15 to 20 miles a day just with your small running pack, with a rain jacket and a sandwich in there. And so those, I've got 2 more coming up next month in September. And then that's kind of the end of my guiding season for me personally. And then the other trip that you mentioned is Bus Run Bus, and that kind of came from doing these hut trips, like really enjoying putting together a group of people and curating runs in a unique and special environment. And so the first one that I did was, I think 3 or 4 years ago, 4 years ago. And that was in the lower 48 in the Western US. So starting in San Francisco, going to Yosemite, Grand Canyon, Zion National Park, Las Vegas, and then out to the California coast and back up to San Francisco. And the geography of that is just all over the place: desert, redwood forests. Obviously with Las Vegas and San Francisco, you've got an urban environment. And then of course the Grand Canyon and Zion, just 2 of the most iconic desert landscapes in the world. And the main reason that I wanted to put that trip together is because of the bus itself. The bus is a coach bus, like a Greyhound, a large passenger bus that's been converted on the inside to just make a really comfortable environment. There's a couple tables in there, bench seating, a humongous bed in the entire back of the bus. We call it the cuddle puddle, where everyone just kind of lays down and relaxes. And you can put up to 30 people on this bus, and it just becomes kind of a little bit of a party, hangout session with incredible views going by outside the window at 60 miles an hour. And so that one was 4 years ago. And then I knew that this bus company also does trips up in Alaska. And so I started talking to them immediately after, like, hey, we need to put a trip together in Alaska. I've been going to Alaska for 10 years, every year for 10 years. It's one of my favorite places in the world. If I wasn't married, I would probably be living up there right now. And so 3 years ago, we got a trip organized, but then the pandemic happened and we had to cancel it. And then 2 years ago, it seemed like we were going to be able to pull it off. But again, it was unclear if the bus was going to make it through Canada to get up to Alaska. And so this past year, I finally was able to pull it off. The bus made it up there. I had 25 people on the bus, and we did a 1,000-mile road trip visiting some of my favorite places in Alaska. You know, the bus pulls up to a trailhead, everyone gets off and does either an out and back, so whatever distance they feel comfortable with. And then in some cases, point to point runs, like 15 miles and 20 miles, stuff like that. And yeah, it was just stunning. It was, it requires a lot of work, organization on my part to pull it off. And I was thinking just before this trip happened this past year that I thought it would be the last time that I do it. And then I just like personally, like I had so much fun on it, and I'm like, nah, I gotta figure out how to keep this going and do another trip. It's just too much fun.
Yeah, it sounds absolutely amazing when I read up about it, and then with you just speaking about it just then, just just that trip, just the one, like going, you know, across to Vegas and San Francisco and the coast and everything, just sounds like. Do you get? I know you were saying it's a lot of organisation, but is it all the stress before organising it, and then when you're on the trip, everything just works out, or do you worry that, you know, if you're responsible for 25 to 30 people going out at the start of the day on a trailhead, do you get stressed with that, thinking, you know, is everybody staying together? Are you stressing that people aren't in contact with each other? Because to me, that I love the idea of that, but I would feel a bit responsible for all those people.
Yeah, most of the stress is beforehand. But then while I'm on the bus, I'm constantly counting up to 25. And like, you know, with this trip in particular in Alaska, we had a couple people get on the bus for just a couple days, and then a couple people left early. And so I'm like, wait, are we 23 or are we 24? Are we 25? And like just counting constantly, 23, 24, 25. And so there is some stress there. Part of what makes it work is that I do stress that it's an unguided trip. That you need to be responsible for yourself out on these trails. I do make sure that people run in at least pairs, but ideally small groups. And so, yeah, it's just a way for people to kind of find other runners of their similar ability and to get out and share this experience with them. So yeah, there is some stress on the trip, but you know, people do take it seriously and look after each other, which I think is also part of the experience.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I know over here, I organise something on a much smaller scale. Every month I organise something called the Free Social Trail Run. So we just go, and it's in the Peak District, so it's in the area of natural beauty near us, the national park, the Peak District National Park, and we just meet up. It's like a Facebook group and WhatsApp group where we just arrange somewhere to meet, somewhere new that maybe a few people have been to, but not everybody's been to. So it's kind of like in the same way that you would organise a trail run, and you'd be probably apprehensive to go there on your own, perhaps, but because there's other people going there and everybody's in the same boat, you kind of feel relaxed, and you've got people turning up that they'd never been on a trail run before. They've literally the first trail run they'd ever done, and they didn't know what to expect. And I think there's so much value in that kind of community in there, because trail runners, you know, we are, you know, ultra runners are probably a different breed again, aren't they? But trail runners are different to your normal people, and we want to try new things. Do you feel like there's scope for that is like a business for you? Could you turn that into something that, you know, as you retire from, you know, competitive running and that kind of thing, is that something that you've kind of set your stall out to try and make a living doing that, or are you quite happy racing and filmmaking, that kind of thing?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I haven't raced very much in the past few years, and this model of kind of trail tourism, running tourism, if we want to call it that, has definitely taken a much center role in how I interact with the sport. I really enjoy putting together groups of people and showing them that running isn't just about racing, that it's because for me, racing, I've had a lot of wonderful experiences with racing, but I've also had some pretty terrible ones. And we can always try and look at the silver lining of those terrible experiences, whether it's a really bad race, or like a twisted ankle, or like I didn't put in the work beforehand. um, but I just think that it's important that running isn't like the main focus of it is not racing. I know that it provides big goals and for people to focus on, and to get themselves into shape and to stay motivated. But for me, running is about interacting with an environment and sharing an experience with other people. And if that's just during a race, it comes and goes so quickly that you're really challenged to distill what the experience was down to. And the people that you shared it with come and go in a single day, as opposed to a week-long trip where you get to like interact with people for an entire week and make genuine friends, and kind of talk about running if you want, but also about so many other things. So yeah, we'll see. As I now have a daughter, like leaving the house periodically for a week at a time is definitely much more of a challenge than it was a few years ago. So is it sustainable for my personal life? I'm not sure, but I really enjoy it, and I know that a lot of people get a lot of benefit out of this different perspective of running.
Mm. Yeah, because I know you've spoken that, I've heard you speak about that before, just speaking about it being as more of an adventure, the thing that you whatever project you've taken on to do. What over the years then, over your career of trail running, what's been your favorite standout experience in these adventures you've had?
Man, I would have a hard time pinning one down. I know and just in thinking, like the reason that I found your podcast is because you had Martin Cox on, and he went on for an hour and a half, hour and 40 minutes about his all of his experiences, and Martin. Yeah, it was just Martin and I were really good buddies for 2 or 3, 4 years there. I raced in Europe for 3 years. This was in my kind of mid to late 20s. And Martin was the very first person that kind of took me under his wing, and he saw in me something of himself, I think, someone that was willing to, sleep in the forest when they didn't want to spend money on a hotel, and then definitely take advantage of a free hotel if the race director was offering it. Um, and so just reflecting back on my time in Europe, but like really guided by Martin, and some really great camaraderie there. I just yeah, that I have such fond memories of that. And so yeah, I mean, I was just saying how races uh, can be negative, but there's 4 years there of really positive race experiences. And yeah, I guess there's one story that I like to tell in terms of like a really cool experience from running over the past couple decades. And Martin there's this race called the Matterhorn Berglauf, Matterhorn mountain race, actually quite popular with English runners. And I don't know even if it's still going on. I'm sure it must be, but it starts in Zermatt and it's just an uphill race. It goes up to, it climbs 3,000 or 4,000 vertical feet. And then you're literally just right at the base of the Matterhorn. And it's just absolutely stunning. And Martin had finished really well there on multiple occasions, and I think the previous year, and they had, the race organization had put him up in this incredible 5-star hotel right in downtown Zermatt that must have been like 200 or 300 years old. And they put him up in a suite, like a bedroom with a living room and like a kitchen. And I hadn't ever raced there before. And so I had absolutely no status, and I was going to go camping in the woods. And he's like, "Oh no, man, you're staying in the suite with me." And so we just like lived it up there for 2 nights and then did the race. And Martin won the Masters division. I had a mediocre race. I didn't do well. But for winning the Masters division, they put him up in a different 5-star hotel just a couple blocks away. And so he and I moved over to the other hotel and stayed there for 2 nights. And I just remember this breakfast buffet at this hotel. I think Einstein was one of their more notable guests that had stayed at this hotel. This breakfast buffet started at 7 in the morning and then finished at 11. And Martin and I would get there right at 7 o'clock and have a cup of coffee and a croissant, and then go out for a 3-hour run and just completely smash ourselves, and then go back for the breakfast buffet a second time and just complete feast, and then go back and hang out in the hotel room. And then after that hotel stay was done, he and I were both back out camping in the rain in the trees, just 2 blocks away from the hotel again. And so yeah, that's one of my more positive memories of running and racing and travel and time spent with really interesting and wonderful people.
Yeah, he's an interesting fellow, and it was only a chance meeting that I got chatting to him at Sacramento Airport, because I went over to Western States and was on the media team. I was running with one of the follow cams from Roby Point down to the finish. And I was traveling back up north to go and see my brother who lives on Vancouver Island. So I was flying from Sacramento up to Vancouver. And it was I was obviously noticing in the airport, there's lots of people with the T-shirts on and everything. And who's, by the way that everyone's weary and walking with a bit, who's done the race. And I was stood talking to another English guy that had done the race, and I was chatting to him. And then Martin comes over and just joins our conversation, just like kind of part of the conversation, and starts talking to us about the race and having this conversation with him. And he's talking about how his race had gone and how he'd struggled and had trouble with nausea and sickness and stuff. And then he was talking about coaching and everything. And I was like, "I'm sure I know you from somewhere." And I was like, "Just tell me your name." He's like, "Oh yeah, Martin Cox." And I'm like, "Oh, I know who you are now. I know I've listened to a podcast that you did with somebody else. Can't remember who it was." He's like, "Oh yeah, I did that podcast with him, but I don't really do podcasts." And I was like, Would you do one more podcast just for me? Even though I only met him like 10, 15 minutes before. And he was like, "Don't really like doing podcasts, but okay, yeah, I'll do a podcast for you." And then in between time, he said, when we were arranging the time, he was like, have you got plenty of time for recording? Because the last one I did lasted 5 hours. I'm like, 5 hours. So that podcast that you heard with, the one that I did with him, that was like 1 hour and 40. I was struggling to sort of contain him. And apparently the one that he did before that lasted 5 hours, the guy who did the podcast edited it down massively and took loads of information out. And he says he was a bit perturbed by the fact that all this stuff had been taken out. And I was like, well, yeah. I don't know anyone who wants to listen to a 5 hour podcast, no matter how it is. So I know that bit of a worry of yours that the podcast was going to go on for too long, but I just had to reassure you that there's no worries. We try and round things. So I think so I think if it's all right with you, I don't want to keep you any longer than is necessary. I know you've got a wonderful. What job are you about to do now in your house?
I've been working on renovating a bathroom, and actually the podcast with Martin allowed me to take down all of the drywall and pull up a whole bunch of tile, and yeah, it was the perfect length of time for that job.
And now you've got to dig a concrete floor up, haven't you?
Yeah, exactly. I got to dig out the pipes and the drainage pipe and reroute some things, and yeah, I get to do the grunt labor. I've got a friend that helps me out with the more skilled stuff. So yeah, I'm just prepping it for him.
Well, I don't want to keep you from that job that you're looking forward to so much. So to sort of conclude then, what have you got planned for the near future then? Is there any projects that you've got coming up, any films you're thinking of making?
Yeah, so there's a film that it's already been shot. It's in the editing process right now. We're calling it Ultra Training, and this is I am obviously quite fascinated with the intersection of travel and running. And so I wanted to put together a running trip by Amtrak. So Amtrak's our national rail line here in the States. And I wanted to do a big either point to point or a loop and get off at certain places and go running in those places. And so this past May, I went with a friend of mine from Santa Fe, New Mexico, to the Grand Canyon, to Los Angeles, and then up to San Francisco, all on train and checking out a whole bunch of different places along the way. So that should come out, I believe, October. And then other projects, I was highly inspired doing the Bob Graham round a few years ago, which I know Martin talked about. Me and Scott Jurek, we both went out there and toured around the Wales and then up to the Lake District, and then managed to just barely duck under the 24 hours to get our Bob Graham round finish. And I just like the format of it so much that, that this person created a challenge that can be done by not by everybody, but by people who dedicate themselves to the terrain and to their own personal fitness to get this done in 24 hours. I think that one turn of the earth, that mentality is really interesting to me, and to fit that with the landscape really allows you to connect both with yourself and with the landscape that you're passing through. And so I've designed a route here in Santa Fe, New Mexico, that I call the Trans-Pecos Express. And this is about 80 miles and 22,000 vertical feet of climbing, and defined by about 14 or 15 peaks. And unfortunately, it's not a round, it's a point to point, but it is something that I think can be done in under 24 hours. And I'd love to give it a go. So possibly early October is kind of when my window for that is. And I've got a good friend who is also from New Mexico who's interested in doing it with me. And I just think that it would be a really wonderful way to connect with this land and this environment, and with myself here. And now that I'm thinking about it, I'm now the same age as Bob Graham was when he did his round, or I will be next year. I think he was 42. I'm 41 now.
Yeah, it's I still haven't done it, but I've got some of my running buddies have done it. And actually, I was supposed to go the weekend of Western States when I'd flown out to California. I was already pre-booked in. I let my friend down, really, actually, because he was doing his Bob Graham that weekend, and I was supposed to be a mule for him on a couple of the legs, and I had to. I was like, I'm sorry, I've got to fly to America instead of coming to help.
Yeah,
had enough. There's, we've got like a queue of people wanting to help him with it anyway. So
totally,
that will have to wait anyway. So it's good. It's clear that you've got these projects on the horizon, and if people want to sort of keep in touch with you and see what you're up to, is it the best thing to do is to direct them to your website or to your social media?
Yeah, website's great. It's rickeygates.com, RICKEYGATES. And then Instagram is kind of seems to be where I put most of my stuff out there these days. And that's also just at Rickey Gates.
Brilliant. Right. So I'll put those into the show notes so people can find you on there. So much appreciated, Ricky. I appreciate you coming on and speaking to us this morning, this afternoon.
Thanks so much, Sam. Likewise, nice chatting with you.
Thank you. Cheers.
Okay.